David thought his marriage to Alicia was unshakable, a union built on love, trust, and shared dreams. But when he discovers her betrayal, the foundation of their life together crumbles. Fueled by heartbreak and anger, David orchestrates a public revelation that leaves Alicia exposed and humiliated. As the fallout of their fractured relationship unfolds, David fights to protect his children and reclaim his dignity. Yet, just as he begins to rebuild, an unexpected tragedy strikes, forcing him to confront the depth of his own pain and the lingering shadow of Alicia's choices. A gripping tale of love, betrayal, revenge, and loss, this story explores the fragile threads that bind us and the scars left when they're severed. The gala was always her stage, a dazzling performance where Alicia basked in the glow of admiration. That year was no different. Her crimson dress seemed to drink in the light, casting her in an ethereal glow. She moved through the room with a practiced elegance, exchanging smiles and laughter with colleagues and clients. I stood at her side, as I always did, a quiet sentinel to her brilliance. But something felt off that night. It was subtle, a fleeting glance across the room, a smile that lingered a second too long. I shook it off, attributing my unease to fatigue. After all, Alicia had always been magnetic, people naturally gravitated toward her. Still, the whispers began in the back of my mind, their murmurs impossible to ignore. For weeks, Alicia's behavior had shifted in small but significant ways. Her late nights at the office became routine, her explanations for staying out becoming vaguer. Her laughter, once so full of warmth, now carried a private edge, like an inside joke meant for someone else. The first seeds of doubt were planted one evening when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Alicia was in the shower, the sound of water drowning out the world. I glanced at the screen, expecting an innocuous notification, but what I saw left a sour taste in my mouth. A text from Nick, her colleague. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You were amazing." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the words, willing them to change, to morph into something harmless. But they didn't. They remained there, stark and damning, a betrayal captured in pixels. When Alicia emerged from the bathroom, toweling her hair dry, I was back at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through emails. My mind raced, caught between confrontation and caution. If I accused her outright, she'd deny it. If I stayed silent, I might never know the truth. That night, as she lay beside me, her breathing slow and steady, I resolved to find answers. A few days later, the gala provided the perfect opportunity. It was her world, a sphere of polished charm and professional networking. And yet, as I watched her from across the room, I noticed how often her eyes strayed to Nick. They weren't overt. Alicia was too careful for that. But there was a rhythm to it, a glance, a faint smile, a quick exchange of words when they thought no one was looking. My stomach churned, the weight of suspicion pressing down like a stone. When she slipped away toward the end of the night, my instincts kicked in. I followed at a distance, weaving through the crowd. My heart pounded as I trailed her through the gilded halls, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was paranoid. But then I saw them. In the shadowed alcove near the coat check, Alicia and Nick stood too close. Their voices were low, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that spoke of intimacy. And then it happened, a brief but unmistakable kiss. I turned away, the image seared into my mind. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to make a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I slipped back into the crowd, my hands trembling, my chest tight with anger and humiliation. When Alicia returned to my side minutes later, her smile was radiant, her demeanor unchanged. She laughed at a colleague's joke, her hand brushing mine as if nothing had happened. I played along, the mask of a devoted husband slipping into place. The drive home was a quiet one. Alicia chatted about the evening, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I nodded at the right moments, my responses clipped and measured. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the evening in excruciating detail, every glance, every whisper, every stolen moment between them. I knew I couldn't let it go. I needed the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I combed through her phone when she wasn't looking, checked her emails, her social media. I even scrutinized her calendar, cross-referencing dates and times. What I found was a trail of breadcrumbs, text messages, receipts, small inconsistencies that, when pieced together, painted a damning picture. Alicia was cheating. The woman I had built my life with, the mother of my children, was betraying me. The realization hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and hollow. But I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. Evidence that couldn't be denied or twisted. Proof that would hold up under the weight of her excuses and justifications. So, I hired a private investigator. It was a desperate move, but desperation had become my constant companion. The investigator was thorough. Over the course of a few weeks, he provided me with everything I needed: photos, timestamps, even a recording of a conversation between Alicia and Nick. It was undeniable. The night I received the final report, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the folder in my lap. The weight of it was crushing, but it was also liberating. This was the end of the charade. The lies were over. When I walked through the door, Alicia greeted me with a smile. She was radiant as always, her laughter filling the air. But this time, I saw her for what she was, a stranger wearing the mask of the woman I loved. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I planned my next move, knowing that the storm I was about to unleash would change everything. The days following the gala were surreal, a delicate dance of pretense and planning. I moved through life as if nothing had changed, forcing a smile when necessary and responding to Alicia's usual chatter with noncommittal grunts. She didn't seem to notice. Or perhaps she simply assumed my distracted demeanor was the result of work stress. Either way, her oblivion played perfectly into my plans. The private investigator I hired, a man named Raymond Price, was discreet but efficient. He came highly recommended, his reputation for uncovering the truth well earned. When we first met in his small, sparsely decorated office, I had been hesitant, unsure if I was ready to take this step. But as Raymond laid out his methods and assurances, my resolve hardened. I needed to know everything. Trust is fragile, Raymond had said, his voice calm and measured. But the truth, no matter how painful, is unbreakable. It didn't take long for Raymond to uncover what I had feared. His updates came regularly, each one peeling back another layer of Alicia's betrayal. There were photos of her and Nick at a secluded cafe, their heads bent close together, smiles intimate. Receipts from hotels and restaurants, timestamps lining up perfectly with her supposed late nights at work. Text messages exchanged with a frequency and familiarity that made my stomach turn. The piece de resistance came in the form of a recording. Using a discreetly placed device during one of their meetings, Raymond captured a conversation that left no room for doubt. Alicia's voice, soft and conspiratorial, spoke of stolen moments and longing, while Nick's responses dripped with the arrogance of a man who believed he had won. I listened to the recording in the solitude of my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The pain was sharp, a knife twisting in my gut. But beneath the pain, something else stirred: anger. Not the blind, impulsive kind, but a cold, calculated fury that steadied my resolve. It was time to act. That weekend, I proposed a party. It was out of character for me. Usually, Alicia was the one who loved hosting. But I painted it as a celebration, a chance to gather friends and family in the warmth of our home. Alicia was delighted, throwing herself into the preparations with her usual enthusiasm. She had no idea what was coming. The day of the party arrived, and our home was filled with laughter and conversation. Alicia floated through the room, charming guests with her easy grace. I watched her from a distance, a drink in hand, my face betraying none of the turmoil beneath the surface. At precisely 8 p.m., I tapped my glass, calling for attention. The chatter died down as the room turned to face me. Alicia stood by my side, her hand lightly resting on my arm. She smiled up at me, her eyes filled with trust and pride. It made what I was about to do all the more satisfying. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady. "Alicia and I are so grateful to have you here to celebrate our love." There were murmurs of agreement, polite smiles all around. Alicia squeezed my arm, her gaze warm. "And it is because of that love," I continued, "that I want to share something very personal with all of you." I reached behind me, pulling a manila envelope from a side table. The room grew still, an air of anticipation settling over the guests. Alicia's smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "This," I said, holding up the envelope, "is a testament to the strength of our relationship. To the trust we've built, and the challenges we've overcome." I opened the envelope, pulling out its contents with deliberate precision. Photos. Receipts. Copies of text messages. I held them up for all to see, one by one, letting the evidence speak for itself. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alicia's face drained of color, her hand dropping from my arm. Her eyes darted to the photos, then to me, disbelief and panic warring in her expression. "And it is with this evidence," I said, my voice cold, "that I am filing for divorce." The room erupted into chaos. Murmurs turned to exclamations, guests shifting uncomfortably as the weight of the moment sank in. Alicia reached for me, her voice trembling. "David, wait, this isn't." I cut her off with a raised hand. Don't insult me by pretending. I know everything, Alicia. Every lie, every betrayal." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not regret, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had taken control of the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the stunned crowd, "I apologize for the disruption. Please, enjoy the rest of the evening. Alicia and I have nothing more to discuss." With that, I walked away, leaving Alicia to face the fallout. I could hear her pleading with our friends, trying to explain, to salvage what was left of her reputation. But it wasn't my concern anymore. Upstairs, I sat in my office, the muffled sounds of the party filtering through the walls. I stared at the evidence spread out before me, a grim reminder of the life I thought I had. There was no going back. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And as I sat there, alone but resolute, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt free. The aftermath of the party was both a whirlwind and a void. Once the guests had filtered out, many offering awkward, half-hearted platitudes on their way to the door, Alicia and I were left alone. She stood in the living room, clutching a crumpled tissue, her once flawless makeup smeared from tears. Her red dress, the one she had worn to captivate and impress, now looked like a costume, an ill-fitting mask of her shattered pride. I sat across from her in silence, the weight of the evening hanging heavy between us. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the occasional sniffle from her side of the room. I let her squirm, stewing in the wreckage she had created. Finally, she broke the silence. "David," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "can we please talk about this?" I raised an eyebrow. "Now you want to talk? After everything that's happened?" Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, her gaze pleading. "I know I messed up. I know I betrayed your trust, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, rebuild what we've lost." I laughed, a bitter sound that cut through her words. "Lost? Alicia, we didn't lose anything. You threw it away. You tossed our marriage, our trust, into the fire and watched it burn." She flinched, her tears flowing freely now. It was a mistake, David. A horrible mistake. I was confused. Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't insult me with excuses. You weren't confused, Alicia. You made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices. And now you're reaping the consequences. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt no sympathy. Instead, I rose from my seat, towering over her. Do you even understand what you've done? The life you've destroyed? And for what? For him. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. That was all the confirmation I needed. For the next few days, Alicia tried everything to win me back. She begged, she pleaded, she promised to change. She even resorted to guilt, reminding me of the good times we'd shared, the family we had built together. But her words rang hollow. The damage was too great, the betrayal too deep. Meanwhile, I busied myself with preparations. The divorce papers were drafted and filed, the process set in motion with a ruthless efficiency that mirrored my resolve. I informed my lawyer of my intention to seek full custody of our children, citing Alicia's infidelity and the emotional toll it had taken on our family. He assured me that we had a strong case. As the days turned into weeks, Alicia's demeanor shifted. The desperation in her voice gave way to bitterness, her once gentle pleas replaced with sharp accusations. You're not perfect, David, she snapped during one argument. You've made mistakes too. Maybe, I replied coldly, but I've never betrayed you. I've never lied to your face or humiliated you in front of the people we care about. She had no response to that. By the time we reached our first mediation session, the battle lines were clearly drawn. Alicia sat across the table from me, her expression icy, her lawyer whispering in her ear. Mine was equally stoic, a seasoned professional who wasted no time dismantling her claims. We're seeking primary custody, my lawyer began, sliding a neatly compiled dossier across the table. Mr. Carter has been the primary caregiver for the children during Mrs. Carter's frequent absences. He's been a stable, loving presence in their lives. Alicia bristled. Those absences were for work, she argued. I was providing for this family. And yet, my lawyer countered, it appears many of those absences were not work-related at all. We have evidence that Mrs. Carter used work trips as a cover for her extramarital activities. He laid out the evidence with clinical precision, receipts, emails, hotel bookings. Alicia's lawyer scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. The mediator took notes, his expression unreadable, but I could tell we had the upper hand. After the session, Alicia cornered me in the parking lot. Her face was flushed with anger, her hands clenched into fists. You're trying to destroy me, she hissed. I met her gaze evenly. You destroyed yourself, Alicia. I'm just making sure our children don't suffer for your mistakes. Her lips quivered, but she said nothing more. She turned on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, I found solace in my children. They were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they knew something was wrong. I made it my mission to shield them from the worst of it, to be the stable, loving father they needed during this tumultuous time. I also leaned on my support network, friends, family, colleagues who rallied around me with unwavering loyalty. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had people who cared about me and wanted to see me thrive. And slowly but surely, I began to heal. One evening, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat in the quiet of the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. The weight of everything, Alicia's betrayal, the legal battles, the emotional toll, pressed down on me. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had lost a part of my life, but I hadn't lost myself. And as I stared out the window into the night, I realized that I was finally ready to move forward. The divorce was finalized on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves outside the courthouse glowed in shades of amber and crimson, a stark contrast to the gray cloud hanging over my life. Alicia and I signed the papers in separate rooms, avoiding eye contact, avoiding words. This was the end of a chapter neither of us had foreseen, the wreckage of a life we'd once built together. The terms were clear: I had primary custody of the children, the house remained mine, and Alicia's visitation rights were limited to weekends. It felt like a victory on paper, but the reality was hollow. The echoes of her betrayal lingered in every corner of my mind. That evening, I tried to find solace in routine. Dinner with the kids, bedtime stories, their laughter filling the house like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But even in their joy, I felt the weight of something unresolved. Alicia had made mistakes, yes, but she was still their mother. And in quiet moments, I wondered if my decisions, justified as they were, had created cracks in their innocence. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 weeks later. Alicia hadn't shown up for her scheduled visitation. Calls to her phone went unanswered, and texts remained unread. At first, I assumed it was another one of her flippant disregard for responsibility. But as hours turned into days, my irritation turned to worry. On the third day, a knock at the door shattered the uneasy calm of the afternoon. 2 police officers stood on the porch, their faces grim. My heart sank before they even spoke. "Mr. Carter," one of them began gently, "may we come in?" The world seemed to tilt as they explained. Alicia's car had been found at the bottom of a ravine off a remote highway. A single vehicle accident. They speculated that she might have lost control on the winding road, but the details were murky. What was clear was that she hadn't survived. The news hit me like a sledgehammer. Alicia, flawed, infuriating, and so achingly human, was gone. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, reduced to a name on a police report. For all her faults, I never wished for this. The finality of it was unbearable. In the days that followed, I found myself adrift in a sea of grief and guilt. The children, too young to grasp the enormity of the loss, clung to me with tearful questions I struggled to answer. "Why did Mommy go away?" Emma asked one night, her big brown eyes searching mine for an explanation I couldn't give. "She didn't want to go," I whispered, pulling her close. "Sometimes, things happen that we can't control." I tried to reconcile my anger with my sorrow, my relief with my regret. Alicia had hurt me in ways I never thought possible, but she had also given me years of love, 2 beautiful children, and a lifetime of memories. Her mistakes didn't erase the good she had done, nor did they absolve her of the pain she caused. It was a cruel paradox, one I would carry for the rest of my life. The funeral was a small, somber affair. Friends, family, even colleagues I hadn't seen in years gathered to pay their respects. As I stood by the casket, staring at the woman I once called my partner, I was overwhelmed by the weight of everything unsaid. Apologies I would never hear. Forgiveness I could never offer. After the service, I found a quiet corner of the cemetery, away from the murmured condolences and tearful goodbyes. There, under the shade of a towering oak, I let the tears come. They were for Alicia, for the life we had lost, for the family we were supposed to be. But most of all, they were for the children who would grow up without their mother. Months passed, and life moved forward, as it always does. The kids and I found a new rhythm, a fragile normalcy. I threw myself into parenting, determined to be both mother and father to Emma and Ben. Yet, late at night, when the house was quiet and the world slept, I would sit alone in the living room, haunted by the shadow of Alicia's absence. On the anniversary of her death, I drove to the cemetery. The headstone was simple, etched with her name and dates, a life reduced to 2 numbers and a dash. I placed a bouquet of lilies at its base, the scent a faint echo of her favorite perfume. "I hope you found peace," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm trying to find mine." As I turned to leave, a gust of wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the faintest hint of her laughter. Or maybe it was just my imagination, clinging to fragments of a woman I could never truly let go of. I walked away, the weight of her loss forever etched into my soul. Life would go on, as it always does. But some wounds never heal. They simply become a part of you, a silent reminder of what once was, and what could never be again.